Good evening. I'm Kelly Gordon, and you're listening to NPR News. When President Trump returned to office in 2025 and appointed RFK Jr. as his Health and Human Services Secretary, he signaled his support for the powerful Make America Healthy Again movement that Kennedy spearheads. MAHA, as it's come to be known, is a many-armed animal with several different priorities, but one of the largest is reforming America's food system, and that's where we're going to focus tonight's conversation. MAHA supporters want to remove harmful chemicals from what we eat, limit ultra-processed food, and focus on nutrition as a way to prevent disease. That seems like something few of us would argue against. But 1 year in, the movement is running into opposition, sometimes from the White House itself. One example, last month, President Trump signed an executive order boosting the domestic production of the common weed killer glyphosate, which is the main ingredient in the pesticide Roundup. That triggered a howl of outrage from many in the MAHA movement, since glyphosate is one of the toxins they want banned. What does the mismatch in MAHA's goals and the Trump administration's deregulation agenda mean for the MAHA movement? What should the role of government be when it comes to what we eat? I know that our guest tonight has some thoughts. We want to hear from you, too. Where do you agree or disagree with the MAHA movement when it comes to food policy proposals? How would you like to see America's nutrition system change to support better health? You can give us a phone call at 651-227-6000 or 800-242-2828. I'm sorry, I'm going to say that again, 1-800-242-2828. Or if you're watching our live video feed, leave a comment on Facebook or YouTube, and we'll get to it here on the air. Our guest tonight is one of the framers of the modern food movement. Marion Nestle is the Professor Emerita of Nutrition, Food Studies, and Public Health at New York University, and the author of many books, including the recently released What to Eat Now, an updated version of her 2006 bestseller. Nestle serves as Senior Nutrition Policy Advisor in the Department of Health, or she served, as Senior Nutrition Policy Advisor in the Department of Health and Human Services in the 80s under Ronald Reagan, and has spent decades advocating for improved food regulations, transparency, and food assistance programs. And she joins us tonight from New York City. Welcome, Marion.
Oh, glad to be here.
It's quite the summary, and I didn't even get to half of what you've done, so we're really honored to have you here. Let's start with this. The Make America Healthy Again agenda has played out nationally for almost exactly 1 year. RFK was confirmed last February. So let's start by talking about some of the MAHA food and nutrition goals. And I'd like to ask you the same question that I asked our listeners. Where do you agree, and what gives you pause?
Well, first of all, it's been one of the most bizarre experiences for me because when President Trump announced that he was appointing Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as his nominee for Secretary of Health and Human Services, he introduced him by saying that he was going to do something about the industrial food movement. I never thought I would live to hear the President of the United States talk about the industrial food movement. Wait a minute, he sounds just like me. And and when Robert F. Kennedy came in, he began talking immediately about how we're going to get the chemicals out of the food supply. We're going to make America healthy again by having people eat healthier diets. We're going to get rid of ultra processed foods. We're going to get rid of corporate conflicts of interest. I mean, these are all things that I've been working on for decades. I was pretty excited about it. Was I optimistic? I wish I had been more optimistic, but I wasn't very optimistic. And unfortunately, a lot of this turned out to be rhetoric. And when push came to shove, that's just not what we're seeing. Because if you want to get the chemicals out of the food supply, you've got to take on the food industry, the chemical industry. And if you want to get mercury out of fish, you have to take on coal burning power plants. And the Environmental Protection Agency wasn't very interested in doing that. It's much more interested in letting big agriculture and coal burning power plants continue to spew these emissions into the atmosphere. So MAHA came up against politics. And interestingly, it's its own politics. And in the new dietary guidelines that have come out, which kind of the flashpoint for a lot of this, they talk about the overall arching message is to eat real food and to avoid highly processed foods. I can't think of anybody who would agree who would not agree
Hmm.
with that, except for the manufacturers of those products. But whether they're going to be able to do anything about that is another matter.
Right. So that seems like some of the problem is that you would agree with the bark, but there's no bite, almost. That they are saying things that you would agree with, but there's not a lot happening. So, in fact, I saw that you wrote on your very good food blog called foodpolitics.com. If people want to check it out, they should. You wrote a very thorough analysis of the MAHA Commission's initial report that came out last May and found certain things in it that you agreed with, like you just said, but you criticized the final report for having, quote, a lot of ideas for actions that could really improve our health, but it's short on specifics and weak on regulatory action. So, what would you like to have seen?
Well, I think the Republicans have an enormous opportunity to make some real changes in the food system that would be much better. But their approach is not regulatory. They are focused on personal responsibility. And if you focus on personal responsibility, it's up to you to make the choices that you want to make. All we have to do is educate. Our responsibility as government is just to put the education out there, and then it's up to you to make whatever decision you want to. The problem with that is that education doesn't change behavior on its own. You need policy as well. And what I'm not seeing any of is any attempt to introduce regulation. It's everything is voluntary. You want to let's get the companies to volunteer to remove the artificial dyes from their products. Let's get Coca-Cola to voluntarily substitute cane sugar for high fructose corn syrup. I still laugh about that one because I don't think it's going to make terribly much difference.
Hmm.
But this was an opportunity when you got the House and the Senate and the president behind you to make some regulatory changes that could be really important. I'm not seeing those. I'm seeing the opposite.
Right.
I'm seeing, as it happens, this afternoon I met with food service directors, and they are eager to serve children real food in schools. But how are they going to pay for it? And what are they going to do if they don't have kitchens in their schools? So there's a lot of talk, but I
Mm.
want to see the walk that goes with it. And I'm just not seeing that.
Yeah.
It's very disappointing.
I feel like you're echoing what many people who maybe did have more optimism than you did at the beginning of what this movement represented. They felt like they were actually going to have some real changes happen to, get some chemicals out, to do some of the things that you were just saying. And now they are frustrated is one word that I would use that they feel about the movement. They're very uh, angry that things aren't being done. What do you think is the biggest disconnect between those goals and the policies of the administration?
Well, the administration is corporate friendly. And as I'm always saying, food companies are not social service agencies or public health agencies. They're businesses
Hmm.
with stockholders to please. They're really not allowed by their stockholders to do anything that's going to reduce profits. And a lot of what's being asked for here has the potential for reducing the profits of food companies and of agriculture, where the glyphosate is the best example of that. Industrial agriculture just weighed in and said, you can't do that. You can't not give us this herbicide because, we can't convert to regenerative organic agriculture. We don't want to. We won't make as much money.
Hmm.
It'll cost us more. We'll have to know more about how to protect land and soil and, all those things that would be very useful, especially if we wanted clean drinking water. in the United States, they don't want to do it if it's going to cost them more money. And so you have, on the one hand, some very, very good ideas about what would help. And then you have what looks like hypocrisy.
Mhm.
Let's do the dietary guidelines with gold standard science, and let's not have any conflicts of interest. And the science was done by a couple of people under very, very heavy time pressure and with plenty of conflicts of interest. It's very hard to put all this stuff together and
Yeah.
make sense of it. So I would say, yeah, really disappointing.
Yeah.
It's
Tell me a little bit about, because I think this is one of the things that is tricky for people. When you said that there's personal responsibility, and that's what the Republicans are saying, that if we just educate people about how unhealthy ultra processed foods are and how they should be eating more, things that you can identify, that your grandparents could identify, eggs and milk and, you know, beef, things that are accessible here in America, that would be all we need to do. And I just want you to say more because I think that for some people, this is a just different way of looking at the world about the idea that that's not enough to fix the systems that are in place. It sounds like you're saying because the systems are about making money, and to feed Americans healthy will cost more too. For us, if we buy it, if people go to the farmers market or things like that, oftentimes that costs more. Um, about that kind of that trade-off, I guess. On one hand, people want personal responsibility to be the thing that fixes it all, and then on the other, you're saying, well, it's not that easy.
It's not that easy. And I went to public health school. One of the things that gets beaten into you in public health school is that you need to look at social and behavioral determinants of health. And that means, the people who eat the best in America are people who have money and education. Um, and they can afford to buy. They have kitchens, they have pots and pans, they've got knives. They can afford to and they've got time to go to the grocery store and buy real food and cook it. But there are enormous numbers of people in the United States who don't have those things.
Mhm.
And the idea that you're talking to somebody who perhaps is on the SNAP program and is working three jobs, because most of the people who are on SNAP are working, and they're holding three jobs. They're coming home. They're exhausted. They don't have pots, pans, stoves, refrigerators. They don't have a grocery store anywhere near where they live. They don't have an automobile. And they're expected to cook real food.
Yeah.
It would be really nice if they could. We don't have, I learned how to cook in eighth grade, in the eighth grade home economics. We don't have that anymore.
Yeah.
That was considered frivolous, and people don't know how to cook anymore. And lots of people can't afford to or can't even think about doing it. uh, and according to the dietary guidelines that came out, 66% of the calories in the United States diet are highly processed foods.
Yeah.
They're cheaper, they last longer, they're formulated so that everybody will like them. And to say you're not supposed to eat these things, you're supposed to eat real foods that have to be cooked and maybe more expensive. People would be a lot healthier if they ate that way. There's no question about it. But whether people can do it or not
Right.
is something that really needs to be considered. And the government, in issuing the guidelines, specifically said we're not going to consider equity. Equity is off the table.
Right.
So we're not going to consider social and behavioral determinants of dietary intake. We're going to leave it entirely up to individual responsibility.
Yeah. Interesting.
It would be nice if that worked, but it won't.
Right. Half the equation, so to speak. I just want to invite our listeners here into the conversation again. I'm talking with Marion Nestle, who is one of the leading nutritionists here in our fair country. Where do you agree or disagree with the MAHA movement when it comes to food policy proposals? How would you like to see America's nutrition system changed to support better health? You can call us at 651-227-6000. 1-800-242-2828. You could also leave a comment on Facebook or YouTube. It will get in here. And in fact, we have a phone call right now from Mike in Minneapolis. Mike, what did you want to say?
Uh, I think absolutely everybody agrees with the thoughts that the food in this country is killing us, or it's not very good quality. But MAHA's a nightmare. I do wonder. I'm totally ignorant to the mechanics of it, but it seems to me we subsidize row crops, we subsidize commodity crops. We do not subsidize vegetables and whole foods and the things that we should be eating. And I have 3 children who eat 5 pounds of carrots a week, pounds of bell peppers, all kinds of things. They eat much healthier than I do. It's extremely expensive. It costs us a lot of money to do that. It's very expensive in America to eat healthy. I would also say one other thing is we started making our own bread which is a luxury we have. But try to find bread that's not full of chemicals or guar gum and xanthan gum, things like that, but also sugar. There is sugar in everything, and sugar receives subsidies.
Yeah. Right. Thanks, Mike. I'm so glad you called in because you brought up something that I know that Marion can answer, which is about these subsidies, and especially when it comes to things like corn or soy. That's where a lot of the subsidies, the farmers, and that's in Minnesota. So that's our local people here. It's in the upper Midwest. That's what's farmed. And so what would you say, Marion, about what Mike's question? You're like, why don't we subsidize vegetables and food that we can eat instead of these things that go into a lot of processed foods?
Well, we have a food system. The way that I kind of think about it is the Department of Agriculture puts out a graph of what happens to the 12 billion bushels of corn that are grown in the United States every year. And it's an astonishing graph because it shows that almost half of the corn goes to animal feed. And that means not only beef cattle, but also chickens and fish and everything, animal feed. The other half goes to ethanol. And so the subsidies that go to corn, and the same thing is true of soybeans, only that goes to diesel. If you look at the subsidies, those are the big subsidized crops in the United States. And so the agricultural subsidies are going to animal feed and automobile or airplane fuel. And there are no subsidies to speak of that are going to food that people eat directly. So we need an agricultural system that's focused on food for people, not feed for animals, although that's an indirect way, and certainly not fuel for automobiles. To grow food for automobiles just makes no sense to me whatsoever. But these are very, very powerful lobbies. They're in the Midwest. That's the base of the electoral base of the current government. And when Robert F. Kennedy Jr. said glyphosate causes cancer and we need to get rid of it, he had lots and lots and lots of meetings with agricultural producers who read him the Riot Act.
Yeah.
You want to put us out of business? So this is politics. You want to change this system? We have to get money out of politics.
Right.
We have to overturn Citizens United, which allowed unlimited amount of corporate money to go into election campaigns. We have to get rid of that. We have to have elections that are paid for by the public so that everybody has exactly the same amount of money to spend. But then we could elect people who care about these issues.
Yeah, and that's actually a question I was going to ask you, is that it feels, Marion, very far, and I think that for somebody who's been doing this for so long, it must feel the same for you, from where we would like to be and where we are right now. And it feels like a big gully to bridge. What are some of the incremental steps? Like you just mentioned, some of this is just about our political system and our lobbying system and how money goes into politics, and that would be a change that's needed to influence how we eat. What are some other things that maybe you see?
Well, I have a list.
Okay, that doesn't surprise me.
I have a list. If I were the czar of agriculture and food in the United States, I would first of all have get money out of politics. That's the first one. And then a universal basic income. We've got enough money in the United States to make sure that everybody has enough money to eat. The idea that people who are on low wage jobs are also on federal food assistance programs is absolutely appalling because it means that taxpayers are subsidizing Walmart. We're subsidizing Walmart, one of the richest companies in the world, because and allowing Walmart to pay its employees so little that they have to be on SNAP, and then we underfund SNAP. So I think we start with universal basic income. I want universal school meals. Every child in school should have breakfast and lunch supplied by the school, and whatever it takes to do that, that's what we should be doing. For many, many children, the food that they get in school is that's what they're eating.
Right.
That's what they're eating, and we should do a better job of that. I want to see the agricultural system refocused on food for people. That's for starters. I could think of others, but that would that would be a good start.
If you could wave your
Um,
magic wand and make that
yeah,
happen.
yeah,
Those are good. Actually, I want to bring in a caller here. It sounds like maybe he's a teacher. Dave in Wisconsin. Dave, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, hi.
Yes, I teach at two rural schools. I teach middle school and high school as the ag teacher. And we grow a lot of stuff in the classroom. So if you're hungry, you get them play cow whenever you want. We got lettuce, beans, tomatoes. At a previous school, we actually had 100. I used to teach the cooking classes and the ag classes. And we had 100 tomato plants in our foods room.
Wow.
And a small rural school, graduating class of 20 kids. And we were getting 15 to 20 cherry tomatoes a day that was supposed to go to the lunchroom, but never made it.
I want to know how you have grow lights, Dave. I mean, I'm guessing. I'm thinking. It is March in Minnesota, Wisconsin.
We do have grow lights. We actually figured it out. It cost us if they would have left on 24/7, it cost us $7 a month to run them.
Wow.
oh, that's not bad.
LEDs are super cheap, and we do everything from hydroponics to conventional soil.
Okay. How are your students, especially middle schoolers? I mean, this is just when they're coming of age and when they're like, I would just like to have pizza and Cheetos and Mountain Dew as my diet. Those are my three main food groups. So how are they taking, as you've seen, even as you've been a teacher, how do they take this real food and growing their own food? How does it strike them?
Funny enough, even kids who don't want to try it, if they grow it, they at least try it. We do a lot of teach backs because in small schools, the K through 12 are in the same building or close to buildings. So the high schoolers actually go down and teach the elementary about growing. And my previous school, we taught the kindergartners how to grow plants. We even had kale. The local greenhouse gave me all their kale plants they're going to throw away in the fall. And we had 150 kale plants. I'm like, God, it's flowering kale. It's bitter. Nobody's going to eat that. The junior kindergartners picked it, marched it to the lunchrooms. The cooks washed it and put it on the salad bar. And I come down there, and every kid's got a handful of kale on their plate. I'm like, oh, that's trash. They were fighting over who was going to eat it because they picked it. If you can eat flowering kale, you can eat anything.
I love that, Dave. Thanks so much for calling. Marion, what do you hear in that comment?
Oh, what a fabulous school that is. Yeah, I would say a garden in every school, one way or the other, because I've seen this. I've seen kids in the poorest areas of New York City eating salads that they grew and picked and prepared, and kind of fighting over who got seconds. So this absolutely works, and and it's very important to do. But you have to have people in the school who really care, who
Hmm.
think it's important for kids to eat healthfully, and who are willing to take some risks and do these kinds of things. But when it works, it's fabulous to watch.
Yeah, that's really fun. I want to go here to Palmela and Sioux Falls, who has a question for you, Marion. Palmela, are you there?
Hi, yeah, this is Pamela
Oh,
Cole.
I'm sorry, Pamela. I said your name wrong. Hi, Pamela.
Hi. I live and work here in Sioux Falls at a nonprofit. I'm the executive director of Bread Break, and we do food recovery here in, roughly a 225,000 person city. We recovered 400,000 pounds of food last year with approximately 70 volunteer drivers. And my question is, how do we look at our food system as a whole in the United States and minimize the food waste because it is equivalent to 2% of our GDP. We're wasting $400 billion worth of food every year. I grew up on a family farm in North Dakota, right by Canada, and it's just an absolute shame how much food we waste in the United States that could go to programs that your host suggests with helping to feed younger people better. We relocate food business overage, surplus food, and we take it to agencies that serve those in need here in Sioux Falls.
Right.
We love what we do, but I'd love to see less food wasted.
Yeah, that's a really great question. What would you say, Marion?
I would say let's go back to the subsidy system. The way that the subsidies for corn and soybeans and the other subsidized crops works is that the farmers get, and I'm not sure farmer is the right word, the agricultural producers get paid according to how much food they grow. So the subsidies are an incentive. The main effect of the subsidies are an incentive to grow as much food as possible. Consequently, we produce roughly twice as much food in the United States as the country needs as a whole. There are 4,000 calories produced for every man, woman, and little tiny baby in the country. Most people need, on average, 2,000. These are very rough figures, but roughly half of the amount of food that's produced. So waste is built into the system. And the figures that I've heard that make sense to me is that 70% of the waste occurs at the production level, at the farm level. A lot of that you can't do anything about. It's bad weather, it's climate, it's various things that happen, and we don't have systems for gleaning those fields. And 20% is 10% occurs at the grocery store. They are really good at inventory control. There's very, very little waste from the grocery industry, and then 20% at home. So yes, you as an individual can work on your 20% and do the best you can. And I don't know, I have a terrace on my apartment in Manhattan, and I compost.
Yes. And composting is getting easier. A lot of these things are getting easier. So I love Pamela's comment that, as she tries to make sure that food doesn't go to waste, that it gets to people who maybe could use it, try to do a better job of thinking about what we're buying, that lettuce in the back of your drawer that needs your attention. Even Dave's story about saying, hey, kale, if a kindergartner can eat it, I bet you could find a way to use it too. So those are all some of those personal things that we can do. I just want to make sure that people know that they can call in. You have one of the preeminent teachers about nutrition with us tonight, Marion Nestle. You can give us a phone call at 651-227-6000, 800-242-2828. We're talking really about MAHA, the Make America Healthy Again movement, their food policy proposals. Tell us where you agree, where you disagree, what you would like to see change with the nutrition system to support better health. And you can give us a phone call or leave a comment on Facebook or YouTube if you're watching the live stream there. So I want to go back a little bit, Marion, to the whole MAHA movement and those sorts of things. I think that many don't necessarily disagree with those food goals, as we've been saying, but they are concerned more with like RFK Jr. and his views on science and scientific inquiry. So there's kind of a disconnect. They agree with the solutions, but maybe not the rationalizations behind them. So I would love you to tell us how that complicates things for people like yourself who've been pushing for these changes for a long time.
Yeah, I'm my degree doctorate is in molecular biology. I was trained as a scientist. I think like a scientist, and I think science is really important. And the idea that you would make recommendations for changes in the food supply that don't have scientific backing makes no sense to me. And I keep coming back to the dietary guidelines. You don't like the way the previous dietary guidelines scientific advisory committee wrote its report. You hire your own scientists to do their own. I mean, that's one way to do it, and that's what they did. I don't think anybody would argue that eat real food is a good message. And I don't think anybody would argue that people would be much better off eating less highly processed food if they could. The question is, what kind of policies do you have that are going to support that? And when you see what's being done to SNAP, the main federal food assistance program, its budget's being cut, and and the policies that are being enacted are all policies designed to get people off of SNAP. The SNAP, everybody's very excited about the SNAP waivers, which refer to the Department of Agriculture's finally agreeing to remove sugar sweetened beverages and some other foods from being allowed to be purchased with SNAP benefits. But I've heard analyses of these that say flat out, this is another way to harass the poor and get them off of SNAP, because what they're trying to do is to reduce the SNAP rolls. If you want poor people to eat healthfully, you want to make sure they have enough money. You want to get the minimum wage up high enough so that they can afford to feed their families. I mean, there are lots of ways of approaching this if you didn't look at the poor as being individually and personally responsible for their own plight. But we in the United States, many people seem to have the idea that the poor are poor by choice. Just like that was the English poor laws of the 1600s. That was exactly the way the English poor laws were devised, was on the assumption that people are poor because they choose to be poor, not because they had bad luck in birth.
Right.
And were born just to the wrong parents, or parents who didn't have any money. So I keep coming back to these social and behavioral causes of these things, and think that those are the things that need to be addressed in public health terms, upstream, which means policy.
Right.
The best way to get people to eat healthfully is to make healthy foods accessible, affordable, and desirable.
Right. Do you think that this was always a doomed sort of thing for the MAHA movement, in the sense that you're saying the real answer here, it seems to be, is deregulation, or I'm sorry, more regulation, more help along the food system chain to change some of these big systemic sorts of things. But instead, what the Trump administration wants to do is deregulate the system. And it's, like you said, cutting the staff. In fact, I was wanting to ask you that question, is when it comes to like the FDA staff that has been cut there, how are those sorts of cuts, even within the agencies that are right now set up to help the food system, how are those cuts helping or hurting us when it comes to trying to make sure
Well,
people eat
you
healthy?
know, the one place where Kennedy has talked about regulation is in the generally recognized as safe area, which is in the FDA's purview. And he wants what's called the grass loophole closed. That loophole allowed food companies to decide for themselves whether the additives that they were putting in the food supply were okay or not. Well, if you're going to regulate if you're going to regulate the grass and make sure that there's regulatory oversight over those additives, there are thousands and thousands of those additives. And I've seen FDA analyses of the safety of these kinds of additives. And this requires somebody who is really sophisticated about the science, who can take the science, analyze it, study by study by study, come to conclusions about it. This cannot be done quickly. And it cannot be done by people who haven't had an enormous amount of scientific training. And if you fire them all, and send them off into, some other planet. And the staffs have been reduced enormously. Who do you think is going to do this?
Right.
You don't have any institutional memory, and you don't have the really sophisticated experts who are able to do this kind of work.
Right. I have a question for you here on the new food pyramid, which I did want to talk about here. Lori in Minneapolis is with us. Lori, what's your question?
Well, I kind of wondered about the emphasis on beef and on added protein in general, this craze of having a lot of protein. I mean, my understanding is that you only need half of your weight in grams of protein per day. In other words, if you weigh 120 pounds, you only need 60 grams of protein, which is very easy to get without trying for the most part. So anyway, I'm kind of wondering about the wisdom of that, and then in particular getting protein from beef, which I have always understood that animal fat is not good for the heart.
And beef tallow. Yeah, those are really good questions, because we did kind of reform the pyramid, and now things like she's saying, Marion, are like beef and avocados and other things at the top, whole milk. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I mean, the way I see it is protein is a euphemism for meat for a lot of people. And even though the guidelines specify that you can, you choose proteins from meat, and then there's an as well as clause where they mention plant proteins. But the caller is absolutely right that protein has never been an issue in American diets, because if you're eating enough calories, you're going to get enough protein. There's protein in everything. There's protein in plants. There's protein in animal foods. Nobody is protein deprived. The rationale for increasing protein, and the guidelines call for a doubling of the amount of protein. Most Americans eat that much anyway, so you don't need to double it on top of that. You just keep doing what you're doing and you'll be doing fine. But the rationale for it is that there was a big focus on how plant proteins are inadequate because they do not have an amino acid composition that resembles human amino acid needs as much as do animal products. This is true, but as Frances Moore Lappé showed in Diet for a Small Planet, which was first published in 1971, if I remember correctly, if you eat different plant proteins, beans and rice, for example, you've taken care of the essential amino acids. And this has been known for a very, very long time. And you don't even have to eat them at the same meal. So protein is a non-issue. And the only reason that I can think of for making this enormous emphasis on protein was to be able to say, eat more meat.
Yeah.
And in fact, and there's been a chorus of eat more meat from the Secretary of Agriculture and the Secretary of Health and Human Services.
Right, since those are their areas. I do want to bring in here Minnie from Brainerd. Minnie, what did you want to say?
Oh, hi. Thanks for taking my call. I just think the MAHA movement is a joke. And to Marion's point, where is the policy? They had a trifecta. They had the House, the Senate, the president, and we still have red dye, all the dyes in our food. Aldi 15 years ago removed a lot of the garbage from their supply chain and their brand. But we can't do it as a country when they know it can cause behavioral problems in children. It's so bad for our health, and the glyphosate, all of that. So policy, which should have been pretty easy to pass, never did. I mean, here we are, you're in all this big talk, and nothing has been done to actually make it happen. And if it's not regulatory, if it isn't done, so people that have access to food, you know, like to Miriam's point, who don't have time to cook whole foods, who can't afford organic options, who work 3 jobs, come home exhausted. So whatever they grab, it's at least a little more clean than what they're getting because it's toxic. And it's bad for our kids. And we look at the disease we have in our country compared to other countries when we have the best medical system in the world, but we have this disease. And why? 25,000 additives when a country like Germany maybe has 400 that are suspect. I mean, come on, all this talk from RFK about how he's going to come in and he's going to gut the FDA and you know, get this all these toxins out of our food. Nothing's been done.
Minnie, I have to ask, were you optimistic? You know, Marion said that she wasn't super optimistic at the beginning because she's been doing this for a while. But I'm wondering, for you, when a year ago you were hearing these things and these promises and these proposals, were you optimistic then?
Oh, heck no. But
Okay.
that conscious bias, I have friends who were big RFK fans, and they were cheering and Ron, and he's going to do this. And I was just very cautiously optimistic, but not really. Yeah. I mean, this doesn't surprise me, but it still ticks me off.
Yeah.
Because he loves the limelight. He loves to hear himself talk. But has he done anything? Nothing.
Yeah. Thanks for your call. I really appreciate Minnie. And it gives us a chance, Marion, to talk a little bit about additives and things like this. You are an amazing nutritionist. Can you talk a little bit about that part of the science when it comes to what people want out of the foods when we look at other countries, that sort of thing?
I mean, I thought color additives were a slam dunk. You know, that there was a big
for them
push
to just push
to
that and to get it
remove.
removed,
There
right?
was a big move right at the beginning to get color additives out of the food supply. I thought nothing could be easier. Because, you know, if you just think about the color dyes in breakfast cereals, there are these companies that make these breakfast cereals with the color dyes in them are already making cereals in countries all over the world without them,
Right.
or using vegetable dyes or a different kind of dyes. So getting them out of the food supply ought to be a piece of cake. And in fact, the cereal companies, first of all, the reason that the dyes are there in Fruit Loops and other kinds of kids' cereals are because kids think they taste better with the bright colors. And there's plenty of research that shows that. So General Mills took the color dyes out of Trix like 10 years ago or something like that. Sales went down. They put the color dyes back.
Right.
You know, I mean, that's how it works. Now, Kennedy has said that the dyes will be gone by the end of April. And whether the cereal companies are going to be able to do that by the end of April or not, I don't know, but I'm looking forward to seeing it, see what happens.
To see if it actually materializes.
But that one was easy, and it's not happening. Or it's not happening fast enough.
Yeah. I do want to talk, just because you're here, you have such an amazing history in this field. So from 86 to 88, 1986 to 1988, I should say it that way. My kids like to say from the 1900s, Mom, from the 1900s.
Right.
You served as senior nutrition policy advisor at the HHS and managed the first Surgeon General's report on nutrition and health. So I want to kind of know, back then, how was the decision made to create a government report on nutrition, and what was that focus? Because it was new, right?
Yeah, it was the one and only. First of all, this was the Reagan
Right.
administration. So when I worked for the government, I worked in the Reagan administration, and as a senior nutrition policy advisor, editing the Surgeon General's report on nutrition and health. The Surgeon General at the time was C. Everett Koop, a
Mm.
fundamentalist Christian who everybody worried a lot about, but he turned out to be a public health hero, as it happened. Um, the idea was that nutrition was very controversial. A report had come out in 1977 that advised eating less meat. It caused a furor. The dietary guidelines started in 1980 to try to be a consensus document about what people should be eating. But the idea was that it was the government's responsibility to give the public the best advice possible based on um, an understanding of what the current research was about. And then in 1990, Congress passed a law that said you had to do this every 5 years. But the Surgeon General's report was meant to be a consensus document from government agencies. Um, it was like pulling teeth. I was the third project officer. And I was very lucky. The report came out while I was still working for the government. I got credit for what was good about it, and I did not get blamed for what was not good about it. I was really lucky. But that was the famous report that said that fat was the most important thing anybody should worry about.
Okay.
And I can explain the reasons for that. It was really saturated fat. It was really meat, but they couldn't say meat.
Mm.
So they used saturated fat. Meat was the highest source of saturated fat in American diets. They didn't want to say saturated fat because they thought the people couldn't tell the difference between one fatty acid and another, and that if people reduced their fat intake, they would automatically reduce saturated fat and would automatically reduce meat. But boy, it didn't work that way.
Yeah.
It did not work that way. That was when Snackwells started making fat-free
Remember
cookies.
Snackwells. I remember
Snackwells.
Snackwells. Yes, that was an era.
Um,
In fact, that's a question. Since you have been doing food advocacy for over 4 decades, what do you think as you've seen things swing and the politics influence things that you can say or that you can push for? What is the most effective way to make change happen? Is it always kind of 2 steps forward, 1 step back?
well, you have public, you certainly have the public demands for things. And, I think one of the hugest influences on diet right now is the GLP-1 drugs,
Mm.
because people who are taking these drugs don't want to eat as much. They want to eat as healthfully as they can on the limited amount that they're eating. And this has caused a big push towards either eating real food or eating products that are high in, well, here we're back to protein again, that are high in protein, vitamins, minerals, and low in sugar. And the big change over the food supply in the last 40 years has been the increase in the number of calories that people are eating. The reason that 75% of American adults are overweight or obese is because they eat more than they used to. And there are lots of reasons why people are eating more. I think it has a lot to do with the food environment, with agricultural subsidies, and with an investment system that insists that corporations not only make a profit, but grow their profit, forcing the food industry to find ways to sell food to people, to get people to buy more food when there's twice as much food in the food supply as anybody needs. So that's kind of the way I see it. And we need to create some kind of food environment that encourages people to eat more healthfully and makes it easier for people to make healthy food choices.
Yeah.
That's a systems change.
Right. Yeah.
Very difficult to do.
I have to ask you a personal question, and I hope it's okay to mention your age. It
Oh
was
no.
it was the New York Times. We'll just say late 80s, which if anybody is
Mm.
watching us online, they would not guess, Marion, because you have a vitality that is younger than your actual number on the page. And I
Good
wanted,
nutrition.
oh, that's what I was going to ask, is I wanted to ask about your diet and kind of how you have eaten and what you would recommend for people.
Well, I actually eat real food. I certainly have eat my share of junk food, but I try to do it in moderation.
Mm,
There's a big push in the dietary guidelines to eat less sugar. I think that's a really good idea. I would not like to give it up completely.
mm-hmm.
If you ask me what my favorite food is, it's ice cream. But I try to do everything in moderation, and I try to fit to. I would never advise people to eat in a way that I don't eat. And the basic principle of nutrition always has been to eat a wide variety of relatively unprocessed foods. That's been advice from, for as long as I can remember. That's the way I eat.
Right.
And it's worked pretty well for me.
Yeah. And also you walk, right?
Oh yeah. I live in New York City. I don't have a
That's true.
car.
Yeah, those of us who are in the Midwest right now in Minnesota, we have to walk on the treadmill still. We're waiting. We're waiting for the spring to happen. Um, I just want to ask one last time about what you would like to see. We only have about a minute and a half left. If you could wave that magic wand and fix maybe two things tomorrow in our food system, what are the things that you say are the priorities that you would like to push forward, whether it's a part of the MAHA movement right now, their proposals or not?
Yeah, I'm very worried about people who can't afford to eat well. And I want to see something done that will really make it possible for people who don't have a lot of resources to do that. And that means higher wages, it means more
Mm.
support for SNAP, exactly the kinds of things that this administration is fighting. And I think we should all be advocating. I want to turn everybody into food advocates. So, and there's something called the Midwest Academy that has a book called Organizing for Social Change. That's a manual on how to do really effective advocacy. Read it and go for it.
Okay, well, I think you've probably done some of that for us tonight. You've created some food advocates and helped us to be educated. I want to thank you so much, Marion, who is a professor emerita of nutrition, food studies, and public health at New York University, for joining us tonight. It has been a pleasure to have you here.
It's been a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you. This conversation was produced by Gabrielle Zuckerman. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Have a great evening.
Support for tonight's program comes from Alight and Northwest Minnesota Foundation, helping create a trusted space where Minnesotans can come together, engage with one another, and better understand the issues shaping our communities. We're grateful for their support of thoughtful civic dialogue and connection. Thanks for being with us tonight.